The Last Stand of the Pharaoh, Ramses III and the Battle Against the Sea Peoples. The waves crash against the shore, mirroring the chaos that was about to engulf the world. Ancient ships, symbols of power and trade, now carried a storm of destruction. The Mediterranean, once a cradle of civilization, was about to become a battlefield. I am Theron, a sailor who has seen empires rise and fall. I have witnessed the fury of the sea and the resilience of mankind. Let me tell you a tale of a world on fire, a desperate battle, and a pharaoh who stood against the tide. The year is 1177 BCE. The world is teetering on the brink of collapse. From the north, a terrifying enemy emerged, the Sea Peoples. They were a storm of warriors, a coalition of tribes, a force of nature unleashed upon the civilized world. They brought fire and sword, leaving behind only ruin and despair. Egypt, the land of the pharaohs, was about to face its greatest challenge. Ramses III, the last great pharaoh, knew what was coming. He saw the writing on the waves, the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. He knew that Egypt was the last bastion against the encroaching darkness. Their origin remains shrouded in mystery, lost to the mists of time. Some say they came from the Aegean, others from the distant lands of Anatolia. Wherever they originated, they descended upon the world like a plague. They burned cities to the ground, shattered empires, and left a trail of devastation in their wake. The Hittite Empire, the Mycenaean kingdoms, the cities of the Levant, all fell before their relentless onslaught. No one could stand against them. Driven by desperation, hunger, or a thirst for conquest, they pushed whole peoples before them. Families, warriors, entire tribes were on the move, seeking new lands, new homes, or simply survival. They were a force of nature, unstoppable and unforgiving. Ramses III was no fool. He had spies, scouts, and informants who brought him news of the Sea People's advance. He knew their strength, their ruthlessness, and their insatiable hunger for conquest. He understood that Egypt was next. The Sea Peoples were masters of the sea. Their ships were swift and deadly, capable of navigating the treacherous waters of the Mediterranean. They could strike anywhere, anytime, with devastating force. They were a nightmare come to life. Ramses III was not just a pharaoh. He was a strategist, a leader, a warrior. He knew that he could not meet the Sea Peoples head-on in open battle. He needed a plan, a strategy, a way to turn their strength against them. He studied their tactics, their movements, their weaknesses. He learned that they relied on speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. He realized that he needed to find a way to negate their advantages. He decided to lure them in, to let them come to him. He feigned weakness, allowing them to believe that Egypt was an easy target. He knew that the Sea Peoples were arrogant, overconfident, and eager for plunder. He chose his battlefield carefully: the Nile Delta. The shallow waters, the treacherous currents, the hidden sandbars. These were his allies. He knew that the Sea People's ships, designed for the open sea, would be vulnerable in the delta. The Egyptian ships, on the other hand, were built for the Nile. They were smaller, more maneuverable, and better suited to the shallow waters. Ramses III had turned the Sea People's strength into a weakness. He had set a trap. The air crackled with tension. The sailors stood ready, their eyes fixed on the horizon. The Sea People's ships were coming, a dark line against the setting sun. The battle was about to begin. A maelstrom of wood, screams, and arrows erupted as the two fleets clashed. The Sea Peoples fought with unmatched ferocity, their axes and swords dripping with blood. The Egyptians stood their ground, defending their homes, their families, their way of life. Egyptian archers rained death upon the Sea People's ships, their arrows finding their marks with deadly accuracy. Grappling hooks were thrown, pulling the enemy ships close. Boarding parties swarmed across the decks, engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The Sea Peoples fought like cornered animals, their desperation fueling their rage. They knew that defeat meant death or slavery. They fought with the fury of men who had nothing left to lose. The Egyptian soldiers fought with the courage of men defending their homeland. They knew that the fate of Egypt rested on their shoulders. They fought with the determination of men who would not let their families be enslaved. Ships were caught in the shallows, their hulls scraping against the sand. Rams slammed into each other, splintering wood and sending men flying. Fires erupted, turning the sea into an inferno. The water turned red with blood. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning flesh. The screams of the dying filled the air. It was a scene of unimaginable horror. The battle raged on land as well. The Sea Peoples had landed troops on the shores of the Nile Delta, seeking to outflank the Egyptian fleet. Ramses III was ready for them. He had fortified the borders, built strongholds, and positioned his troops to meet the Sea Peoples' advance. He had anticipated their every move, prepared for every eventuality. Egyptian chariots thundered across the battlefield, their drivers wielding bows and spears with deadly skill. Infantry clashed with infantry, shield against shield, sword against sword. The battle was a brutal, bloody affair. The Egyptian forces matched the Sea People's fury with their own. They fought with the strength of men defending their homes, their families, their way of life. They would not yield. In the end, the Sea Peoples were defeated. Their ships were sunk or captured, their armies routed. They were pushed back into the sea, their dreams of conquest shattered. Egypt was saved. But the victory came at a cost. The world was forever changed. The Bronze Age was coming to an end. A new era was dawning, an era of iron, of new powers, of constant struggle. The Bronze Age collapse was a period of widespread societal collapse that occurred in the Late Bronze Age, around 1200–1100 BCE. It affected a vast area, including Europe, the Near East, and the Mediterranean. The Sea Peoples were not the sole cause of the Bronze Age collapse, but they were certainly a symptom. They were a sign of the times, a harbinger of the chaos and upheaval that was to come. The old empires were crumbling, the old trade routes were disrupted, and the old ways of life were disappearing. A new world was being born, a world of iron, of new powers, of constant struggle. Egypt survived the Bronze Age collapse, but it was never the same. The empire was weakened, its resources depleted, its power diminished. The world had changed, and Egypt had to adapt. The Sea Peoples faded into history, their origins and motivations remaining a mystery. They were a force of destruction, a catalyst for change, a reminder of the fragility of civilization. History is a storm, a relentless force that shapes and reshapes the world. Sometimes, to survive, you must sail into the eye of the storm, to face the chaos head-on. Ramses III did just that. He stood against the tide, against the Sea Peoples, against the forces of destruction. He saved Egypt, but he could not stop the coming of the new era. The world was changing, and nothing could stop it. The Bronze Age was over. The Iron Age had begun. A new chapter in human history was being written, a chapter filled with conflict, innovation, and the constant struggle for survival. Remember the story of Ramses III, the last great pharaoh, the man who stood against the Sea Peoples. Remember the Battle of the Nile Delta, a desperate struggle for survival. Remember the Bronze Age collapse, a time of chaos and upheaval. For history is not just a collection of dates and names. It is a story, a lesson, a warning. It is a reminder that even the greatest empires can fall, that even the most powerful civilizations can be destroyed. It is a reminder that we must always be vigilant, always be prepared, always be ready to face the storms that will inevitably come.